Hey there, YouTubers. School of Tomorrow. I always want to be friendly to people who are just checking the channel out. At the time of this recording, it's exactly 9 a.m. at the moment, Pacific Standard Time. Or is it still daylight time? I think it's still Pacific Daylight Time. And it is, what, September, I should know this, 20th, Monday. So I like to situate myself in place and time, and then I like to get into the abstractions that really don't change that much from time to time, and so you get a repetitious effect. Like you hear me talk about the same things, and I do believe in spiraling. So there's a Python theme, which is a computer language, but then there's mainly a synergetics theme, which is a philosophy. And in the synergetics philosophy, we have, and this is not unusual for a philosophy, a geometric core language, not just an algebraic or logical propositional calculus a la Bertrand Russell, but something more right brain friendly, something that gives you something to visualize about. And you could call it a mnemonic system, and that you've got a memory palace, except it's very stark and austere. It's not really a palace in the Baroque sense, but just a geometric diagram. And you've seen many philosophies, probably, if you think about it, that begin with some sort of geometric um, analogy. Um, Talk more about that in a minute. So let's go back to this meetup of meetups. I call it a meta meetup. And we're not really meeting physically anywhere these days, even at the Pauling House, close by, walking distance from me, and I'm talking about the boyhood home of one Linus Pauling. It's across the street from these two houses. Let's see if I have a good picture of it. So, not meeting in the Pauling House, a few of us have taken to meeting in my backyard, and it's not really the same thing at all, but I was able to connect to a meeting of the Philadelphia Greater Thinking Society, got that wrong, Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, and 52 Living Ideas, which is hosted by Sri Kant. Now, Chris Fernley here, CJ we call him, is doing a very lengthy program. He's got his own training for himself, and he's exploring comprehensivity. What does that mean? And more important, how does one go about it? If you say, I'm going to be a comprehensivist, what actually are you going to do? What are the workouts? Like in athletics, if you declare, I'm going to be a triathlon person or a hammer thrower, then you dive into the requisite sort of training, right? And what is the training if you're going to be a comprehensivist? So Chris is looking into that. And here's Sri Kant. Now, all this is very obviously recorded in the sense that we have permission to record. When we start the meetup, when you join the meetup, you get something in your face that says not only is this being recorded, but people have the ability to record locally. And this is the kind of thing I've been trying to get across to wanderers also, that we don't want to have a tight, security-minded approach to video. We want to share with the public, and we want to do it in a fairly liberal, this is the meaning of liberal as in non-censorious, freewheeling. Open source is another way to look at it. Copyleft is another way to look at it. I think the design science revolution, insofar as it has injected some new life into human program, is it has liberalized. And a lot of the tools that we're using would not exist were it not for that liberality. And we struggle in English with the free software versus free software because we do want those two meanings of free. Free as in beer, free beer, but also free as in liberated. And Office Libre, they've tried to bring in liberty somehow, but it doesn't quite ring right in software world, in the geek world I live in. So back to Python now. So that was a meta meetup. Now here in the back office, I'm working with David Koski, and he's come up with this cuboid. Now there's the golden cuboid that we've been using forever, and derived from there like our E module from Synergetics. But in this case, and he likes to see the pattern here. Obviously, square root of 1 is just 1, and square root of 4 is just 2. But it's fine to write these roots all in a sequence like this, and you can see how mnemonic, again, how valuable this could be to someone just getting their feet wet in geometry. And this little pink brick in here that I'm highlighting has edges, well, if you think of all the edges, including the not shown face diagonals and body diagonals, right? So it's got 3 distinct types of face, 2 of each. It's a cuboid, it's a parallelepiped, and it's got an inscribed tetrahedron, and I get into all that. But the edges, including diagonals, including body diagonal, are second root of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I say second root instead of square root, but you can say square root, no problem. It's just that's precisely the kind of thing we're looking at. Why do we say square root? And we get into this other way of thinking about both multiplying and the volume measurements and so on change. And it turns out that this great cuboid, if you shrink it by 1/2, let's say, I like to have that operation in there to bring the numbers in line with the unit tetrahedron of edges 1, which is the edge connecting 2 closest packed spheres in the CCP arrangement, right? Like right there. So that's kind of a home base for us in synergetics, 4 spheres packing, defining a unit volume. And to make that consistent and bring the links all into harmony, I shrink this cuboid by 1/2, and then it ends up having volume 3 tetravolumes, the same as the green cube. And given the inscribed tetrahedron of all face diagonals has 1/3 the volume, there's a theorem. The volumes are 1 in both cases for that tetrahedron, the face diagonals tetrahedron. But then there's the corner tetrahedron, the right tetrahedrons, and so the rest of this essay gets into that. Now that was, okay, so what do we do with that? Well, a new tool chain that's come up recently that I've started to get better at is converting this stuff from the Jupyter Notebook context out to PDFs. And electronic publishing, I'd say, is a theme in a lot of what's going on. And there's more than I can talk about because there's just too much. But in the TrimTab Book Club context, which is also something I'm affiliating with to the extent that I'm able, the Wanderers, in the sense that, like, when I joined the TrimTab Book Club the other day, I did so using the Zoom Pro account of the ICEP. Wanderers is using that for its meetups. And I'm trying again to do a sense that there's the noosphere, as we talk about, is something quite concrete these days, thanks to the internet. It used to be much more ethereal, but now it's still ethereal, but it's also much more, a lot more sound and light, a lot brighter, you could say. The noosphere, the sort of cyberspace, has replaced a kind of a nebulous memory space that was shared by scholars before the internet. So this is an excerpt from TrimTab Book Club. I'm just mainly copying and pasting my own writings, but with some prompting by other participants so that we have a dialogue, a dialectic going, interspersed with pictures which were not part of the original thread. In other words, I've doctored it a bit, and I say so at the top. I say edited for television. It's a little tongue-in-cheek because we don't call this a television, but why not? It's a screen, it's moving. It's not a movie either because it's not a television, or maybe, So we multiplied 2 vectors in this alternative namespace. Could be a Clifford algebra, I don't know, that's what I'm asking. I'm not a super mathematician here, I'm just saying Hermann Grassmann of Universal Algebra fame, Hermann Grassmann of Universal Algebra fame, is possibly going to be an umbrella rubric under which to put A times B equals AB, and you got the green triangle as the area. And the units are, of course, the tetrahedron in the case of space, and a triangle in the case of a surface. And so it's a different way to multiply. It's a different graphic, and it changes how you think of third powering. And there's a lot of sort of Necker cube Gestalt switches that you need to do. Like compare the trims versus the normals. It's anthropology, really. Two different cultures. One of them multiplies by closing the lid, do a 60-degree angle between A and B, and then say A times B is just the area of closing the lid right there. And I do give credit, by the way, to one Wayne Roberts in Canberra, I believe, for getting to the triangular conclusion. And then in synergetics, in the Bucky world, we've got the unit TET. And all this I was telling you about previously, this PDF stuff that's going out into the world, pumping it out there, using ray tracing and so on. Like I explain to students all the steps for actually generating this graphic up here at the top, locally on your own computer, getting free open source software to work for you, the liberty aspect of all this. So here would be looking through NB Viewer. My theme here is that in turning our backs on the canonical concentric hierarchy of synergetics, which is just this polyhedral diagram of stuff, in choosing to not make that part of computer literacy or cultural literacy, probably I should say, in making that decision, and I was part of the debates and I watched people come make up their own minds, I've been very certain that this is important. And I think those who don't are taking a big risk, right? And I point out in my writings how much time is going by and how much time is then potentially being wasted if we do decide that this stuff makes more sense than it's been given credit for. And through the memory palace tradition and mnemonics that I bring it in more. Mnemonic tradition, you see. Through a branch of scholarship that you could relate to memetics, actually. And that's a different approach. It's more of a humanities approach. It's not as hardcore mathematical an approach. And I think it's working quite well. And it's not new for me. I've been doing this approach from the 80s, 1980s. Read The Art of Memory, and, it's in my YouTube channel here. So if you're a teacher and you've always been excited by this stuff and haven't known how to teach it, and I'm just saying here's some options for you now that you may not have had before. So keep doing what you're doing. The older you are, the less likely you're going to change much. But feel free, even old dogs can learn new tricks, to download Dimension and Synergetics, a quest from my academia.edu domain. I'm just parked here. That's a very small offering. And then generating the Flextegrity lattice is still more state-of-the-art than I'm able to get with this NB convert utility to web PDFs because they're page breaks. PDFs are not that friendly except on the screen if you don't have page breaks. So to wind up, the week has been one of integrating across more geography, I think you could say. Philadelphia, Portland, New York. Because this meetup of meetups on the East Coast, they've got Bucky Fuller going amidst others, right? Sullivan and the OODA Loop, and there's a certain amount of Jordan Peterson, there's a certain amount of Catholicism, there's some Thomas Aquinas, isn't there? And some Marshall McLuhan. And I've only started to touch, it's called 52 Living Ideas for a reason. Shrikant's very good at bringing together interesting interloculants to have these discussions. So that culture is already thriving, and that's where CJ is parked. And then I'm out here on the West Coast stirring my own brew, my own witch's brew or whatever. Speaking of which, I'll end with, I just thought of a great place-based ending for this whole thing is another visit from Uncle Bill, right? Uncle Bill is my uncle he's actually my, I think, great uncle. He's my dad's generation, or he was my grandmother's sister's son. Still is. Elsie. Esther was my grandmother on my dad's side. Her sister Elsie had several kids. And Bill's the last one now who's still alive, like 95. So he decides to come down to Portland. So on the train, he comes on the Amtrak. Even though we've got Delta virus and all this, he's 95. He's got a walker, and he takes a taxi to Union Station in Seattle, and he hops on the train. And he's down here for like 2 hours. And this time it was just 2 hours because the train going back, Coast Starlight, was on time. Close to 4 o'clock, it was ready to go. So we had quick beer at Ringler's. There's Bill right there. I'm picking him up at the station. Actually, I'm dropping him off. What am I doing? We're going back in time. There's the Witch's Brew illusion there. I like the way McMenamins does their branding, and when I was there at Ringler's, I specifically asked for and was shown where to buy another mask, right? That was a good idea. And so continuing to go back in time, I'm just going to show you chronologically. Hi, Uncle Bill. We're bending the elbow, as he says. There's me. I'm going to connect back up with our meetup in the backyard, the Meta Meetup. I'd call that Rosicrucian, wouldn't you? That's why I labeled it Rosicrucian symbol, right? What do I know, though, right? So Esoterica is part of this, by the way. I hope you got that from my last video where I talk about Paul Laffoley and how this whole concept of dimension and how I suggest that you dive into synergetics through my slideshow up here. This is esoteric stuff. I'm not claiming it's easy, but nor am I thinking the culture turning its back on all this is warranted either. And I'm not the one to walk around and punish, but sometimes it feels like I can see a wrecking ball because it's really an indictment of our culture that it is so paralyzed in the face of some obvious assets that could do us a favor, right? It's like Fuller commits to a positive futurism and then gives a math that there's almost no reason to not enjoy. It's like aesthetically there, and there's been more ever since, and yet we're leaving it to guys like me who, I'm humble enough. I'm just saying I'm not a great mathematician. You can wait 1,000 years for me to chow through some of this, but I think if we had a faster train here, we could get somewhere interesting in a hurry. So I encourage you not to leave it to me, but do take this as an inspiration and source of ideas. And we'll see you in the next video. Have a good week.